Hello, this is episode 23 of the Alfology2 podcast. How are you? How's it going? Glad you are here and listening. So, a couple of things about the podcast. So, the first thing is I've noticed that the audio quality hasn't been great recently. So, it's a bit echoey in this room because it's all hard surfaces. Very little I can do about that, but I have managed to put cushions and coats sort of everywhere behind the mic, and hopefully that will help a little bit. If it doesn't, then I'm sorry, but nothing I can do about it for now. The other thing is that I can hear my breathing a lot when I listen back to it, so hopefully I'm going to be able to combat that by holding the microphone a bit further away from my face. Anyway, that isn't what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is the truth as a concept. And I'll be quite well versed in talking about the truth, bearing in mind I recorded about 20 minutes of this podcast. Oh, but wait, I didn't record it. I forgot to click record. So half of this stuff I've already talked about. A warning, I think it's going to be quite a long podcast. There's a lot of notes on it. I've come up with a lot of stuff. And an important point to note is I haven't done any research. It's all come off the top of my head, which sort of feeds into what the whole podcast is about. So, with no further ado, we'll move on. So, the point of the podcast is, I think, that the truth isn't real. There's no such thing as the truth. It's a lie that's been made up. So, the point of the podcast this week is that there's no such thing as the truth. It doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist in reality. It exists as a concept. So, the concept of there being a truth, things that are real and things that aren't, that does exist, but in terms of reality, we can never really know that it exists because we're humans and we've come up with the concept, but we're unable to achieve the concept. So as far as I can see, realistically, the only way you can know the truth is if you are a person who knows and remembers about everything in the universe in terms both of, the universe materially and all the events within it, both sort of past, present, and future. So you need to know everything that's ever happened to everything in the universe, and then you need to remember it all and understand the context of how that happened. And only then could you know the truth about anything. Until then, it doesn't matter how much you know, there could be something that you don't know, which means that what you think is true isn't. That's essentially what I'm getting at. And theoretically, that person who knows all that could exist, but they don't, and the chances are that they won't. So really, theoretical truth, the concept of the truth can't really exist. So we create our own truths, and that's what I'm going to talk about, how we create our own truths, and what is true and what isn't. And the fact that I haven't done any research doesn't matter, because none of it would be true anyway. Or some of it would be and some of it wouldn't be, but we'll never know. So that is good little sort of move into what we're going to talk about. So the first thing I want to say is that truth and reality, they're sort of fluid things, aren't they? What's real to one person isn't real to somebody else. We are talking about the human concept of truth here, and that is difficult, that fluidness that comes with the truth, and that basically is mostly what I'm going to be talking about. And part of that fluidness is that all truths, all facts, shall we say, all facts are like Schrodinger's cat. So those of you who don't know what Schrodinger's cat is there's this guy called Schrodinger, don't know his first name, should have Googled it, but then again, this is no research, it's all top of my head, so we'll forgive me there. He was like this science guy, I think, and he was into like quantum physics, which is like science but really hard and like really theoretical stuff. And using quantum physics, he worked out that if there's a cat in a box, that cat is both dead and alive until someone opens it and observes it and confirms whether that cat is in fact dead or alive. So the cat exists in a state of being both alive and not alive at the same time until someone sees whether it's alive or dead. And that's basically off the back of quantum theory, and this is my understanding of quantum theory, which is fucking limited. So bear with me. Quantum theory is about how particles or how matter behaves when it's being looked at versus when it isn't. So when it's observed versus when it isn't. What this is on the back of is like an experiment where sometimes particles behave in one way, but then, and you can record that. That's like, you can see the effects of what those particles have been doing. But when you repeat the experiment and make those particles do the same thing, but this time you look at them or you record them as they go, they do something different. So it's like the particles know that they're being watched, and off the back of knowing that they're being watched, they do something different. So the theory is that the particles, because they behave like a wave when they're not being observed. So it's like they basically make them hit a surface, and they hit the surface in like a horizontal line, which is like what a wave would do. But when you look at them, they don't. They all hit sort of like the similar spot, which is like what a particle would do, like a ball would do. That would, if you shot that at something, you would hit in a specific place rather than a wave, which would hit in lots of places. And basically, the idea is that when the particles aren't being observed, they do everything that they could possibly do. So they hit every single possible point of the surface that they could hit, like in theory. And then when you look at it, when you watch it do it, it does the actual one. So it does the one which actually happened. Whereas when you don't look at it, it does all the ones that it could possibly do. So quantum theory is about particles sort of both doing stuff and not doing stuff at the same time, but then they do stuff when you look at it. So what I'm saying is that facts are like the cat. So facts are both true and untrue until they are confirmed to be true. So until they observe as being true by this person who knows everything about the universe, all facts are both true and untrue in terms of a human concept. If that makes any sort of fucking sense, because I'm not sure it even makes sense to me, and I wrote it down just then, although I didn't come up with the ideas, but that is my understanding of quantum physics and cats. And that is my understanding of how the truth relates to those things. So on that thing, so all facts are sometimes are sort of true and untrue until they're confirmed to be true. But then, like, if you get people involved in humans, some facts are true and untrue at the same time, even if you are a human and you are just operating on the normal perception of truth, which is, yeah, I can see it, so it's there. So if I were to tell you that the sky is blue, most people would say, yeah, that's true, the sky is blue. The sky isn't blue, is it? Sometimes blue, sometimes it's grey, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's orange if there's light pollution. So the sky isn't blue. That's not a true statement. The sky can be blue, probably would be a truer statement. But if you would say the sky is blue, people would believe that to be a truth. But it's not. And for example, somebody living on the moon, if they were brought up on the moon, you said, what colour is the sky? They wouldn't say blue. So that shows how the truth can be very easily distorted. And another way in which that can happen is through sort of human perspective. And human perspectives ruin that because people are inherently cunts. That is pretty much what people are. Like, there's not really much denying that. You all know lots of people if you're listening. The chances are you've met several people, and the chances are that you'll be aware that a good level of them are cunts. Probably all of them in some way. So, as a result, humans sort of manipulate the truth, and their perspective on things manipulates the truth because we're one-eyed and we have an agenda. So I tend to work on the rule, what I call the 33% rule, which doesn't really make sense because that there's a percentage point missing, but it's basically like the 3/3 rule. So there's 3/3 to what anyone is saying to you. You can split any fact or anything that anyone tells you into 3/3, and these thirds, it's not a 33%. It's 3/3. So there are 3 parts to what everyone says in any sort of context, and the 1/3 of that is what they're saying is fiction. So 1/3 of everything you hear from people is probably fiction to fit their agenda. So they manipulate the truth. into something that isn't for their agenda. You've got a third of it, which is like honesty. So things that they genuinely do believe to be true, i.e. me saying the sky is blue. I do believe the sky to be blue. But obviously honesty is flawed because some of the things that they do believe to be true are wrong. So that distorts it even more. And then you've got another third, which is up to sort of like your interpretation based on what you know to be true. So they might be their opinion, and you can sort of say whether it's true or not on the basis of what you think. So you got each of those thirds. You got fiction, which you know to be not true, which distorts the facts. You've got honesty, which they believe to be true, but they could be wrong or they could be misled, and that causes more clouding of the truth. And then you've got interpretation, which is really up to anybody. It's like an opinion. So so that means that the truth can't really exist at all if you use that theory. And the way people talk and the way people use their language distorts the truth as well. Like, it's very easy to distort the truth using language. And people do it on purpose, and people do it by accident. But the truth is that, did I just use the phrase, the truth is? Fuck. Can't do that, because that's not what the podcast is saying, that nothing is true. Fuck! Okay, so, I can't remember what I was talking about. Oh yeah, language destroys the truth, or makes the truth. So, the human concept of truth is often based on our language, because we understand pretty much everything that we hear, all the facts that we know through language. And there are gaps in language, and there are flaws in it, and it's not completely clear. And we use it to our advantage. And I'll give you some examples. So let's say, for example, I tell a girl to impress her into sleeping with me that I have a 10-inch penis. And she thinks, fucking hell, that's class. And she comes back to my place, and we sleep together. And at this point, she identifies that I actually don't have a 10-inch penis. I just have a, I don't know, let's say, 9.5-inch penis, which obviously is definitely true. And she says to me, you don't have a 10-inch penis, you lied. And I say, I didn't lie. I do have a 10-inch penis. She says, no, that's a 9.5-inch penis. So I reach under the bed and I pull out a jar. And in that jar, I have a pickled 10-inch penis, which I don't know, I got from a horse or whatever. I don't know where I've gotten it. I didn't lie when I said I have a 10-inch penis. I do have one in my possession. It's under my bed. But she's assumed, because of the language that I used and the assumption of what I was talking about, that penis would be attached to me. So my use of language there, I've misled her. And as far as she was concerned, in truth, I had a 10-inch penis. The facts were that I had a 10-inch penis until she saw it. But my truth was something different because of the language that I used. I knew that I wasn't technically lying, but I also knew that I was misleading her. So the truth exists in several different guises there. So there's my truth, which is that I do have a 10-inch penis, it's under my bed. There's her truth, which is that I have a 10-inch penis attached to me. And then there's the actual truth, which is sort of somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And people who use language, you might hear like people who are like psychopaths who get accused of being very cold emotionally, and they'll say, I have a heart. Well, fucking yeah, you're alive, mate. You're fucking pumping blood around, you have a heart. So what you're saying is technically true. Yeah, I have a heart. But you're using it to convey that you have emotions. So you're using language to distort the truth. Yes, it is true, I have a heart. But actually, as a psychopath, you don't. You have emotions. You don't have emotions. So that is, again, how language can distort the truth. So the person you're hearing, or you're talking to as a psychopath, they hear that you have emotions, but what you're actually saying to them as a psychopath is that I have an organ which pumps blood around my body. So you're using language to create several different truths there. It's a good word, truths. THS is a good set of letters, truths or truths. Good word. Anyway, that was fucking weird, so I'll fucking move on now. And then, okay, right, this is a good one. So, like, you can create the truth in somebody else's mind. You can create the truth through asking a question, so like a leading question. If you don't know what a leading question is, it's a question which is asked to either catch somebody off guard and get them to admit to something, or to convince somebody else who hears the question that something happened. So the classic leading question is, when did you stop beating your wife? So the inference there is that you beating your wife isn't in question. So if you answer that question, you say, I stopped beating her a year ago, they will then say, oh, well, you just admitted to beating your wife. And the other purpose of it is when you've asked that question, if someone else hears that question, i.e. a jury normally, that's where leading questions are normally asked, that jury then gets in their head, even before the question has been answered, that this person has at some stage beaten their wife. And that is what leading questions are there for. So leading questions can create versions of the truth without even making a statement, which is quite impressive, really. And another thing which can sort of make or destroy the truth, and is sort of like when people who are supposed to know what they're talking about get it wrong. So you have experts. So humans in society, we use experts to create the truth. So like if a doctor tells you that you have a cold, then that's because he's an expert, you believe that to be true. But when these people make mistakes, that means that the truth is distorted on the basis of the opinion of an expert. And if they've made a mistake, then they've created a truth which wasn't true. So something which in human society would be true, but in terms of actual facts, is not. So I have an example, and this is a real life example that happened to me. When I was working as a PI, we put somebody under surveillance. She had a massive insurance claim in for an injury. We put somebody under surveillance, and we saw her using a crutch to support her leg, which was allegedly injured, which is a good result for us. That means that, we've confirmed that she is genuinely injured, and she should be sort of paid her claim if everything else falls into line. That's great. But the lawyer who we were working for said, oh no, she's using the crutch on the wrong hand, and as a result, we're going to litigate the case, so take it to court, and we're going to deny her the money for as long as we can. So the insurer who she was claiming against acted on this advice because she was using the crutch in the wrong hand, and the case was litigated. So the courts got ready, and the opposition lawyers, so that the woman who was claiming, her lawyers got ready on the basis of this truth that she was using the crutch in her wrong hand when under surveillance, until the surveillance was reviewed again, and it turns out that she wasn't using the crutch in the wrong hand. It's just the lawyer didn't know that you use the crutch in the hands of the opposite leg. So if you injure your right leg, you use the crutch in your left hand, and the lawyer didn't know that. She thought you used it on the same side as your injury, and as a result, she got it wrong. So she created the truth there for other people to say that this woman was a fraudster, but she wasn't, which is fucking mad. And that's very rare that sort of stuff happens, and experts normally get it right. And that's probably the only notable time that I can ever think of that happening, but it did happen. So all these people acted on information which they believed to be true, and it turned out not to be. It was a fabrication based on a mistake, which is pretty cool. There's something else about the truth, and it sort of links into that person making a mistake, or saying things that are wrong, or normally saying things that are misleading, or saying things that you believe to be true as fact. The classic one, obviously, is I believe in God, right? So if you believe in God, you will often tell people that God exists as if it's a fact. It's not a fact. It's a possibility. And in my opinion, not even a strong possibility, but that's for another time. It is a possibility that God exists, but it is not a fact. So Bertrand Russell has a theory about this, or a thing about this, or a problem to solve, that he says that he has, I think it's a red teapot, and his red teapot orbits the sun. And the idea is that this red teapot is God. Not actually God. He doesn't believe that God is a red teapot. It's an analogy where his red teapot is the same as God in terms of does it exist or not. So is that teapot real? Is it true that he has a red teapot which orbits the sun? And basically he's saying that it's true. But obviously it's not true. So you have to use evidence. So that's how we build truths in our lives. We have to use evidence. And his red teapot thing is that it's not other people's responsibility to prove that he doesn't have a red teapot that orbits the sun. It's his responsibility to prove that it does. Same with God. It's not atheists' responsibility to prove that God doesn't exist. It's Christians' responsibility to prove that he does. And as such, you get into a real muddle with the truth there, because someone will say what they believe as if it's the truth, but actually they need to back it up to prove what they've said. Although that being said, if scientists had found God by accident, do you think they would have mentioned it? Probably not. If you're looking through a telescope one day in science land, in a big lab, big telescope looking through, and you see God giving you a wave, probably wouldn't mention it, would you? Would feel a bit silly. So maybe there is a flaw in that. But yeah, so basically Bertrand Russell has this teapot, and you have to prove that he has to prove that it exists. You don't prove that it doesn't exist, and that's how the truth works there. Truth has to be backed up by evidence. But my original point, if we link it all the way back, is that you can never have enough evidence to definitively prove that anything is true. And you do get to points where so many people believe that things are true that they almost, in human society, they become true. Like God existing, for example. Like, not many people believe it now. Well, obviously fucking loads, but not anywhere near as many as they used to. Whereas 2,000 years ago, near enough everybody in the world would have been religious. And as a result, that almost sort of makes God real in terms of human society. Like, it's hard to argue at that point, because it's like, well, fucking, how can everybody believe in it if it's not true? Which, is sort of like quite a logical argument until you get into the whole point of, well, can you prove it? And then it falls down. But belief sort of creates truth in human society. And that's sort of ties into what I was talking about opinion earlier, that your interpretation of things and your agenda, they create truth within your own world, which is pretty fucking fascinating, really, that, you're using really sort of abstract stuff to create an actual picture of what the world looks like in your head. And it's quite amazing that people are able to do that. And I'm really starting to fucking melt my head now. And the things like, if you have an original idea, like, I don't know, a dinosaur made of Snickers called Graham, who only goes out on Fridays. I'd imagine no one's ever had that idea before. So that idea didn't exist. It wasn't true that idea existed. But now I've had it, it will always be true that idea existed. So it's something so bizarre that no one's ever thought of it, but now I've thought of it, it exists. And therefore that is now true, that thing could exist. But 5 minutes ago, it didn't. Fucking hell, this is freaking cunting fucking deep stuff, isn't it? Jesus Christ. And look, going back to belief, you get things like the Mandela effect. If you don't know what the Mandela effect is, it's an idea that loads of people remember something happening even though it didn't. So loads of people remember that Nelson Mandela died in the 80s. But he didn't. He died in like 2013 or whatever it was. So loads of people believed that he died in the 80s. And there are so many people who believed that maybe it sort of almost made it true. But obviously it wasn't true because he didn't. So, but there's theories that maybe that like ties into like other worlds and like, theories that there are multiple universes, where there's loads of different versions of history happening with slight differences, which does feed into quantum theory because it's all the atoms behaving differently. But fuck that, we're not getting into that. And things like fake news. If you put enough fake news out there, if you got fucking Donald Trump with your Russian troll farms behind you, fucking churning up fake news all the time, then you can create the truth. There's so many people believe it that you think it's true. It's like people believing that Eminem is like a decent guy and, his songs mean something. They don't. They're nonsense and he's a cunt. But you can't fucking prove it because so many people believe that isn't the case. And so many people believe that he's great. So they've almost made Eminem into being actually good through their belief, even though he's a cunt. Isn't that fucking mad? Isn't that fucking mad? If you're sitting there thinking, how much weed did you smoke before doing this episode? It's none. I just, really got into this fucking thing and oh my God, it's hurting my head. But luckily we don't have too far to go. I'm going to try and push through quickly because fuck me. We're at 28 minutes now, although that'll be a bit shorter once I've edited. Let's go fucking push through. Oh, yeah, okay. So there'll be people who have been sitting there all along thinking, I know things that are true. I know things that are true, and you haven't thought of it. Maths is true. That's what you say. You think, Alfie, maths is true. No way to deny it. Maths is true. Like pure maths. Well, look, you've got me there. It sort of is true. There are undeniable qualities about maths that mean that you can really struggle to actually argue with it. And that's why sort of maths goes forwards, not backwards, like science and politics and humanities. They go backwards and forwards and they get rid of stuff from the past and they add a bit of new stuff and then they take it away. Whereas maths methodically goes forward. Maths, it builds up over time. Whereas science and humanities, they build up and then they go back down, then they go back to where they were, then they go forward again. Whereas maths, sort of, the first maths was, 1 + 1 = 2. And then, you end up with fucking algebra and trigonometry and whatever fucking that's all about. But it always goes forward. Maths is never disproved because it's a logical theory, which is sort of like proven to be true in the use of logical models. But the problem is with that is sort of true, but it's actually not because it's all theoretical. So in terms of the human knowledge of truth, it doesn't really apply. And okay, so 2 + 2 = 4. That's what I've got written down. 2 + 2 = 4. That is true. Yeah, look. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. 2 + 2 is 4. But what maths is it's really simplistic. So it doesn't mention two of what. It doesn't mention what those two things are. It's just 2 + 2 = 4. So it's just pure numbers. You can't apply it to the real world. So for example, if I was to say to you, I have 2 dogs, and then I have 2 more dogs. How many dogs do I have? You'd say 4 dogs. And then I'd say, okay, well, one of these dogs has no hind legs and no tail. So how many dogs do I have now? You might still say 4 dogs. You might say slightly less than 4 dogs. It depends on what your definition of a dog is. God, I bet this sounds fucking mad right now. But, if you were to say your definition of a dog, it's like a canine animal with a head, ears, 4 legs, and a tail, that dog with no hind legs and no tail is no longer a dog. So you might have sort of like 3 and a bit dogs, or just less than 4 dogs. So maths has to strip away dogs. It just has to say there are 2 and there are 2 and that equals 4, because maths can't actually account for anything in the actual human real world because there are too many variables. And unless you know all of the information about everything in the universe, then that maths will never work. The only way that maths would work is if you did know everything about the universe. And that sort of feeds into another thing that someone's told me that it is true previously, that if you were to get the equation for the Big Bang, so the mathematical equation on all the reactions between all the elements of the Big Bang, so all the particles and how they reacted with all of the other particles, if you knew that equation, you could follow that equation along of how the chain reaction would go, and you could predict the existence of this podcast and me saying that, because it's a mathematical equation and it's certain to happen. But things like fucking chaos theory, which is that random things happen in large systems, which change everything, and also quantum theory, which is that there are several different ways it could have happened, and particles behave differently depending on the observer. That means that isn't true. So you could, even if you knew everything that was there at the start of the universe, you still wouldn't be able to work out what was going to happen. So you still don't know that anything's true, really. That's essentially what I'm getting at. You still can't work out, the future, even if you have all of the elements of the present in front of you, because you'd need to know everything that happens in the future to work backwards from. Fucking hell, I don't even know if these sentences... I'm at the point where I don't even know if the sentences I'm saying are making sense. I don't even know if they're real sentences. That's where I'm at. That's how melted my fucking brain is. So, point is that 2 + 2 = 4, unless you're talking about things that are real, and then you can get into serious fucking arguments about it. And that is the same with things like... Well, with anything that you might say, that it sort of appears to be true until it isn't. If you were saying a piece of paper is white, you'd probably be right, but there might be one fucking atom in there that is black. And as a result, that piece of paper isn't white. It's white with a bit of black on it. So it's just your definitions as to what is and isn't acceptable. How much detail you focus on can change whether something is true or not true, which is fucking nuts, really. So we try to create truth through evidence. That's how we try and create it. In the real world, you have to provide evidence to suggest that something is true. So that's what scientists do. So you have to get loads of scientists to agree that something is true before it becomes scientifically true. So all the scientists have to agree that evolution happened because there's evidence for it. So they can show all the fossils and how evolution's happened over years through historical, carbon dating and all that sort of stuff. And then all the scientists will look at each other and they'll say, yeah, I think that's true. So once there's an agreement between all the people about the evidence, then you can say that thing is true. That's how we do it in science. But that's not always necessarily effective. So things like gravity, everyone thinks that gravity is real. But it's not. Gravity isn't real. There's not an invisible force pulling you down towards the Earth. That's not the accepted scientific theory, but it was for ages. Newton's theory of gravity was acceptable for ages. That was the truth. You drop an apple, it falls to the ground. And you might say that is still true, but scientifically it's not, because science now operates off, I think it's general relativity or special relativity, one of the two. It's an Einstein theory that all matter is moving through time against space, and space and time is like a fabric, and big objects like the Earth create like a dent in that fabric, and as a result, as you go through, you sort of slide towards it because the dent is pulling you down towards it. Like if you're sat in the center of a trampoline and someone puts a ball on the outside of the trampoline, because you're sat in that fabric and you're heavy and you're pulling it down, the ball will roll towards you. That's essentially what gravity is. So gravity being real is something which most people believe to be true, but it isn't. What's real is space-time and mass creating dents in space-time. Fuck me, this is nuts. That is the truth, or the truth as far as we know. And I'm sure another scientific theory will come along and blow that out of the water, and then that will be true. So you can see how the truth is fluid. It doesn't necessarily exist in one state. And then in sort of society, we have legal rulings. We have the law and the interpretation of the law, and we have decisions of judges, which basically operate on everything I've been talking about. The fact that some things are true and some things aren't. Some things are both true and untrue. Some things we can't call true because we don't know where it came from. These are all things that lawyers use. They say they flip meanings on their heads. They ask leading questions. So lawyers are fucking doing this all the time. They're creating truths and making them not true, and then a judge decides what actually is true, and then that becomes true for future court cases. That's how the law works. So our law and the way our morality is decided on the basis of truths made up by lawyers and then either accepted or not accepted by judges. And then that's what creates what we believe to be sort of truth in society. But as soon as a judge comes along and makes a different decision, that then changes what the truth is. So the truth is in fluid and can't exist in actual fact until we've reached a theoretical point of society being finished. And then you look back on it and go, right, this is now what is true, and that applies to all of history. Although that doesn't even work, because depending on where you are in history, different things might be legally true. So the judge might make a decision one time, maybe right about it, and then 200 years on, the judge overrules that original decision. So he changes the truth, but he's right also because things have changed. Fuck me, this is nuts. I know I've said that a lot, but I really feel like this is the weirdest and most out there podcast we've done so far, despite it being really sort of like reasonably normal stuff in comparison to the balmy ideas I have normally. I just feel like this is definitely the deepest fucking podcast we've ever had. And look, we're nearly at the end, so, that's good. Look, I guess the big idea, this is what I'm trying to get at in terms of how life works and what you should do with your life. This is the only bit of advice I think I've even given on this podcast so far. But if you try and make decisions based on things that you know are true, or if you try and make super logical decisions, like pure logic, with no regard for everything that I said, that these truths are fucking not secure. So you're trying to make decisions on the basis of pure logic, and that logic is based on the truth, but that truth actually doesn't exist. If you're trying to make decisions on the basis of that, then your chances are you're going to make a lot of wrong decisions, because your conscious brain is not capable of processing all those truths correctly, and it doesn't even have the resources to, because it doesn't even know what the truth is. So you're going to make some really fucking bad decisions. So what you need to do is you need to make decisions on the basis of the relation to other people's idea of the truth. So you need to look at all the different ideas of the truths that there are and come up with what you think is the best one, either through logic or sort of your gut feeling. And your gut feeling is very interesting, because it is actually a thing that only like 1% or whatever of the world is processed through your conscious brain. The rest of it is is processed through your unconscious brain. And therefore, if you trust your gut, that's basically the other 99% talking to you. Like your subconscious is talking to your conscious brain. And that's why sometimes you get a gut feeling. So if you go with your gut feeling, the chances are you're going to be a lot closer to the truth than you would be just using your conscious brain, because the back of your mind is a chance to process it. That's why you get that feeling in your gut. I think that's true. So unless you're the person I talked about at the start of the podcast, which is a person who knows everything about the universe, past, present, and future, the chances are you don't have enough information to always make correct decisions, which is why super clever people often end up being super fucking unhappy, because they think that they are clever enough to make logical decisions based on the truth, and therefore that will make them happy. But it won't. There are plenty, probably more, the other end of the spectrum is you've got lots of really stupid, happy people, because they make decisions on the basis of what they think and what their gut is. And that is, you're a lot like to be happier doing that. So if you bin off the concept of the truth and start sort of living your life as you see it in front of you, then you're more likely to be happy, rather than a load of random facts that you don't know are true or not. So I think that's sort of the point, that go with your gut. I think that's what I'm getting at, really. I didn't really have to do it in such a roundabout way, and I'm sorry if none of that made sense. I can't even work out if any of the sentences that I've said in this podcast have made sense. So hopefully that sort of worked, but maybe it didn't. But it's too late now. Also, I did actually like try and, on my notepad, I did have some sort of like jokes to put in, but I mostly forgot to say them. So sorry about the lack of jokes. And look, we'll call it a day there. Like and subscribe to the podcast. Tell all your friends. Follow on social media. All that jazz. And I'll see you next week for what will be a more placid, less brain hurty podcast. Okay? Thank you.